Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United pod. I'm your host, as always, Phil Brown, joined with my regular co-host, the excellent James Rhodes, as United finished their last league game of the season. We'll obviously take a look at that. Lots of other stuff making the headlines. We'll look ahead, of course, to the cup final. All the other news surrounding United. First of all, Matt, how was your weekend?
Yeah, not bad. End of the school term for some things over here, so
Mm.
a lot of family stuff and
Oh,
getting
wait,
get
your kid that
ready.
ended school already?
Well, he's in pre-K, so they
Oh,
kind of
okay.
finish a little earlier than the regular school year. So he's kind of having his first of a graduation as a little one, which was
They're the
kind of
best
cool.
things in the world, man.
Yeah,
Anyone
absolutely.
that is a parent will know this. These little events are the best thing in the world.
Yep,
I you know, obviously with my own kids, and um, I've done so many stupid things in my life, made so many mistakes. But watching your kids accomplish things feels far more satisfying than anything you ever felt when it
absolutely.
was stuff. Being a parent is really, really hard. Because you're flawed yourself. But the emotional, spiritual nourishment you get from watching your kids accomplish things and grow is amazing, and it all goes by so fast. My 17-year-old, I remember taking him to his very first daycare at a year, and
Yep.
you know, now it's funny to see them grow up just like you, and screaming at my kid sometimes because he's going absolutely nuts watching United, wrecking the place. Mom and dad's here, and they're like, interesting.
Familiar, doesn't it?
so, uh,
Like sponges, and they really
mm,
do pick up so much from you
mm,
as they grow.
yeah, it's an amazing thing in life. Okay, mate, like we said, lots of stuff to talk about. We take a look back at some of the stats of the season, see what they tell us. Want to talk about that Simon Mullock report about, of course, Erik Ten Hag. We don't want to make the show about the manager every week, but nonetheless, this is a topic that will not go away until Ineos make it go away, in my opinion, one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll talk about Casemiro, who, of course, came out and said about the disrespect shown towards him. And we'll get your thoughts on a few other things, so we'll get to some of your questions. First of all, mate, what do you think of yesterday?
Obviously a bit of like a nothing game in some respects, right? Obviously, I don't think Brighton had anything to play for. Um, Zerbi announced leaving prior to the game the day before, which was I don't know if it was a surprise, but was certainly rather interesting. Um, that he was departing because he couldn't get along essentially, I guess, with the ownership in terms of moving forward. Um, the first half was bad. Bad. To put
Mm,
it kindly for us, it was bad.
yeah,
Um, I said at one point it was kind of embarrassing watching Adam Lallana outperform anybody on our team for 45 minutes there. The second half, it was good to see. I think the only thing I could really take away as a positive was just good to see, Rasmus Højlund come on. He's in good form. Someone we're gonna need if we have a chance at this weekend. Playing a bit differently, scoring goals a bit differently, which I think is a good thing. Playing more on the run, playing more into space instead of, back to goal. And I think, that's a good thing for him because that's where his strengths are still as a very, very elite runner and fast and everything. And it's good to see him finding some footing. He scores goals when he gets chances.
mm,
And we still make more chances playing on a run like that, getting him those opportunities than we do, anywhere else where we don't make any chances at all. So I thought that was good. Good minutes for Lissandro Martinez.
yeah,
Um, it's good to see that because obviously we'll talk more about it, but those are the little things you just want to take away from a game like that. With one game, really the only important game I feel like in the last 2 months, left coming up on Saturday.
yeah. I would agree with a lot of that. I think you're right. The first half was one of those performances we've seen. It was probably as bad as Palace away,
Yeah,
where it was just diabolical. United's record against Brighton is really poor. It's really interesting to me how, and you've seen this so many times with United, where there's such a contrast between one half of football and another half. And
Mm,
it can be the first half United can be amazing, second half they can be terrible, or vice versa. I mean, Brighton should have been 3-4 up by half time. They, João
yeah.
Pedro missed a couple of but a great chance, was a bunch of chances kicked off the line.
Yep. Yep.
And so United got a bit lucky, just like the bit lucky against Newcastle moments too. But I think they deserved the win against Newcastle. One thing that I will say, as I said just over a week ago, that I had no confidence United would win any of their last 3 games. They've won 2 of them, to be fair. They beat Newcastle 3-2, beat Brighton 2-0 away. In any other context, those are 2 really good results, right? You're right to say that, that game yesterday had a bit of a pre-season friendly feel about it,
Yeah.
where no team was pretty desperate to win it. But I think one thing that couldn't happen for Ten Hag is that he couldn't go and get outclassed tactically by Zerbi. I think that would have been a really, really bad advertisement for him. But it is interesting, James, that if you look at Zerbi wanting to leave, partly because of his disagreement with Tony Bloom over
Hmm.
the model and how they recruit and how they want to recruit and how they and he. I've always felt that Zerbi and Brighton were not totally committed to each other.
Hmm. Yeah.
The last few months, he has been looking outside the club. You listen to some of his interviews, and even bizarrely, when they would sell some players, he was almost, yeah, you should go to these clubs. I was kind of, it sounds more to me like a criticism of the owners, because he was talking.
Yeah.
So just on that, can United really want to implement a model that Deserving doesn't want to work with?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I think that at the end of the day, the model that Brighton have been operating off of, that I think there was a lot of disagreements over, was that he would like to keep or buy a bit more experienced players to try to take Brighton further, right? Because they're a bit of like a young player factory, where they get these young guys in, build them up, and then they sell them. And I kind of understand it, because Brighton are a small stadium, right? The revenue ceiling is a bit low at a club like that, and so I understand from an owner perspective why it's hard to say, if we don't sell these young talents off, that can we even afford to continue, be sufficient, if we're not doing that, and if we start buying older players that have no value, to balance out the team. But can United could United put together something that worked with Zerbi? Probably. I would imagine so. It doesn't sound like he specifically wanted to recruit specific players and be heavily involved in that, but more that he wanted to be somewhere taking kind of the next step forward. I don't think he'll be joining United personally, and I don't think that. I think it's more likely he ends up somewhere in Italy, or somewhere like that. Maybe Barcelona. Yeah, Juventus maybe.
Well,
There's options over there.
Zabi's staying at
What's
Barca, so
Yeah, and that's gone back and forth every other day, it feels like, the last few days. So I don't know if it's changed or not, but
Zabi?
yeah, yeah, they were, yeah, it was like decided he was gonna stay, and then there was more talks and more disagreements, and
Oh, I
I
didn't
don't
know
know
it.
where that is. Yeah, I have no idea where it lands. I don't think anybody does now, but maybe now, or maybe in a year. But there's Milan, there's Juventus, there's maybe Napoli will end up with there's options for De Zerbi. Um, and but in a general sense, I kind of get it, what he's looking for, and there's some logic to it when you look at what's kind of been described. If there was a change for a young coach, and him wanting to take that step up, I think, as it's been described, there would still be a large fee for anybody trying to get him, even though he's kind of been let go. The way they described it, there'd be a large fee for him still.
Zerbi, how would that work if they're both mutually released? They're both, it's a mutual termination.
Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah, I don't know. David Ornstein was talking about it prior to the United match on the US broadcast, and he was saying that there will be something, I guess maybe it's some form of gardening leave type of thing, where he departs, but there's still contractually, if he takes another job, that they're gonna have to pay Brighton a chunk of money. I don't know. There's so much of that, and with these managers, it's kind of crazy. So he wouldn't be free necessarily as it might have appeared originally, but he kind of makes sense for United in some respects. But I haven't really been very excited about the idea of him over the last months. I think in a lot of ways, personally, very similar to Ten Hag, and I don't really see the point in making I think it's a very lateral thing with very similar manager with a lot of similar strengths and weaknesses. Um, Not great the last few months, not great the second half of the season at all. Yeah, I think he'll end up somewhere in Italy, frankly.
In his late defense, I think he's had some similar issues to Ten Hag in that they've had a lot of injuries.
Yeah. Yeah, they
Be
were
fair.
missing 6 starters yesterday, I think.
Yeah, and overall, in some cases they had more injuries than United.
Mhm.
And so, you wouldn't expect Brighton to have a squad to deal with 13, 14 injuries.
Yeah,
That has a major impact on,
and they had to
as
play Europe for the first time
yeah,
too, right?
and as
Yeah.
we know, it has a major impact on playing style and consistency and
Mm.
all that. So, and his slight defense, but it's felt like the second half of the season that they both parties have known there's a partner of the ways coming,
Yeah,
and
I
you
agree.
see it reflected on the pitch. So, I've taken some criticism for my criticism of Zerbi. I'm not saying that he isn't a top manager. I'm not saying that he isn't capable of going to a
Yeah.
top club and delivering trophies. I just don't know.
Yeah, me
And
neither.
and so it's sort of, with Zerbi, it's like I don't know. The second half of the season fills me with some doubts. But anyway, that's for another day. On the issue of Ten Hag, um, I think, first of all, let me just say with Ineos, because I took some criticism over some of my questions at Ineos and claiming the clock starts ticking on their ownership the minute the FA Cup final is over. Because that's really the point where they're going to affect structural change.
Mm,
Everything that predates that is the consequence of what went before them. Now, I understand there's a lot of positivity for Ineos, so people rightly, are sensitive to criticism of them. But as United fans, too many of us have been burned by previous owners. Every owner should be held to a standard and held accountable to the same equivalent standard. And if they fall short of that, they should be criticised 100%. I think the way Ineos went about cancelling the team parties was really, really poor. Really, really poor. Now, the women win the FA Cup. The under 18s, they of course won the league, and there should have been a party for these people. Now, United have
mm,
cancelled team parties before, but they never had success at the other levels.
yeah.
The ladies should not have found out about this at the Athletic, and according to Andy Mitten, this was done 100% to save money. I understand PSR is a thing, but so is morale, right? And human beings need to feel valued. And that those successes should have been recognized. The women, a lot of those women booked holidays
Mhm.
based on this party happening, cancelled flights, everything else, and yet they found out in the media. That's unacceptable to me. And Jim Ratcliffe, anyhow, should rightfully be criticised about that. Um, so there's some things that, to me, in they need to handle better. Now, just on that, I also empathize when you get taken over by a company. Because if you look at how Ineos have made their money, they've taken over companies that have underperformed.
Mhm.
This is going to be bumpy, was a direct quote that I got from a very high ranking United staff member, which told me that it's going to be bumpy in the short term, optimistic in the long term. There's a lot of unpopular decisions. And when you're
Yeah.
cutting budgets back at companies like this, the beginning is rough because you upset staff, you cut budgets, you have to do a lot of ugly things. Um, so they'll not be popular for a while. But if they're cancelling a women's preseason party because of money, well, what does that tell you, James?
Yeah. It's we don't know necessarily all of the issues with the finances for this season, But you look at it kind of across the board, and they're doing the same things. Tickets to Wembley for even players' wives and family being canceled, on top of, you know, the cuts they made to the other staff things, the parties, all of that. I think obviously the financial situation is a lot, you know, probably, I don't know if it's worse than people considered, because I think a lot of people thought it was pretty bad, but I think people are maybe not quite grasping it. You know, in 21, 22, United lost like 100 something million.
Mm.
And as far as I understand, a lot of that was not exempt from anything because it was after the COVID kind of cuts had come into play. There's a cap, and they're over it. Clearly is what it tells me, that they're over it. And you know that there's penalties that go alongside that, and that they're doing some major cuts this season in particular, because, you know, when you said that thing about Ineos, where you're right, everything that they're, you know, it is a challenge because it almost seems like pennies, right? But they can't change players' contracts mid-season, right? They can't change staff contracts mid-season. There's very little opportunity for saving money this year fiscally, right? And for football, that ends June 30th. So coming in the middle of the season, there's very, very little opportunity to save any kind of money and to cut any expenses from the club, because there's so much that can't change prior to that. That's all the consequence of before. And so it's obvious to me that they're looking at it and saying, we're going to, it may seem like small things, but we're going to cut it everywhere we possibly can. Save some money this year, and it all adds up, I guess, to a certain amount of money. We don't know how much that is, but yeah, it tells you the kind of financial state of the club is probably quite a bit more difficult. And you know, we talked about that last year, right? At the end of summer, we were talking about how the moves they were making with the loans, with certain things that they were cutting even back then under the Glazers, was indicative of a club that is really in a bad shape financially and is needing to cut things down quite dramatically. And I think that when you combine all of this with the kind of almost unexpectedness to some of the Glazers pretty much giving Ineos carte blanche to do whatever they want financially with the club, which was not, you know, when they came in, people were saying, you know, just the sporting control is just a piece of it, but really they're running the entire club when you look at it. It tells me they didn't have any clue how to get out of this, which isn't particularly surprising because the Glazers have never really been good business owners. That they had no clue how to get out of it, but it was probably a lot worse than they thought it was. And so, you know, Ineos are here to, I think at the moment, unfortunately, make a lot of unpopular decisions. But you're right. And on this point, you know, Jim Ratcliffe is known for mergers and acquisitions. And that's why I figured he'd always get the deal done with United in the first place. That's how he built the whole Ineos empire. I mean, they've done dozens and dozens of mergers and acquisitions. And mergers and acquisitions, when you get in and take over a company, this is what pretty much happens every time. A lot of difficult, unpopular decisions, cutting costs, things like that in the short term that lead to a different outcome long term, and they're very good at it. But yeah, it definitely tells you the financial situation at United. I think it also tells you overall they want to balance the amount spent on administrative costs, right? Because when you're talking about losses, the more you spend on anything administrative, the less you can spend on football. It does seem, obviously, it's very annoying when you look at it, because how much of it compares to you know, like 1 week of Anthony Martial's contract for not playing for the last few years, you know, and it's tricky, but you know, this is the kind of business that they're used to, and I don't think it's just that, you know, they're obviously working on the other things. It's just that from the outside, there's so little that can be done mid-season that these are all the things that we're going to hear about right now.
Yeah, I think where you have to be careful in this is that football is not a petrochemicals company.
Yeah.
So when you are running a petrochemicals company, your first principles is profits.
Yeah.
That's it, right? It's the whole reason to raison d'etre is profit. That's it. Football has a business side, that has to be run like a business, but it's not just a business because it doesn't have the same, your market assessment of your product is totally different. Your emotional attachment to that is totally different. No one's standing outside a bank holding a scarf up, saying let's go chase bank. So I think cost benefit has to be weighed up. There's a fiscal saving, but is it worth the morale collapse? You have, because ultimately the success and failure of a business is down to the people that work out. That's it. Jim Ratcliffe went and did an interview a while back talking about how I was played quite a bit the last few days about the environment the environment that must be provided in order to make sure athletes and managers are successful, which is absolutely correct. But you can only get that environment when you have collective buy-in towards a team goal. You get that whenever you have a really positive atmosphere in a business. If you don't have that, you're going to have people working towards individual goals. And I think this is to get that environment. Morale is absolutely key. There's something about Rodri saying yesterday about mentality. Arsenal were going there to win. City going to every game to win. And you see other teams with great players, but the mentality is different at City. And that mentality is a consequence of the principles of the owners, and of course, to make sure there's reward, incentive, consequence for not reaching those standards. For Ineos, they have not clarified Erik ten Hag's future, which I think they deserve. That some criticism should be leveled at them for this, because their manager's constantly being questioned about this in press conferences. Maybe the only thing I could say is that Ten Hag's asked him not to say anything, but I would be surprised if that's the case. Managers constantly taking questions about this. We are constantly talking about it. Other podcasts, other media outlets constantly talking about this guy's future. Right? If I'm Erik ten Hag, I want my employer to say something. Man United fans should know going into the cup final who their manager's going to be next season. They need to learn from the way they handled the Van Gaal second, because the way they handled the Van Gaal second was classless. They sacked him immediately after they won the FA Cup. Shouldn't have happened that way, James. Right? Whether it was the right decision or not. And so I think that there should have been some state. The fact that there isn't a statement tells me that they're leaning towards sacking. That's just a guess, right? I've spoken to some representatives of players, and they have said they think he's going to be here, but that was last week. Simon Mullock done a report saying that Bayern and Ajax think he will not be manager next season. Simon Mullock, of course, is very close to Ten Hag's team, and they feel he will not be Manchester United manager next season. What do you think of that report?
I think that if you're Ten Hag's agent, he's false, right? And you're sitting there all season, you've been asking for discussions over a contract because nobody likes to go into the final year of their contract. Players, managers, agents hate it. They never, ever want it to happen because, and we'll talk more about that because I have some strong opinions on this and critiques potentially of what Ineos might do. If you're him, you're looking at it and saying, they have not opened contract talks with me because they haven't, by any reports, they've not talked about a new contract. They haven't clarified the future. We haven't got any guarantees of next season. So if I'm Ten Hag's agent, I'm selling him right now.
100%.
Anybody I can.
And you're thinking that yourself. If you're an employer, you'd be thinking,
you have to.
I have to assume here there's a reason why they're not doing that.
Exactly. You have to. You have to. This is not a criticism. This is exactly what he should be doing. Because, you might even be getting a difference of opinion where Ten Hag is a person, and I could see this with the type of personality that Ten Hag has, that he's sitting there with confidence that he's going to be in the job, that he's going to do it, that he's going to work it, that he's going to earn it, and that he's going to stay, because it's kind of the type of person he is. And his agent might be looking at it and saying, that's fine that you have that confidence. I don't. So I'm going to be looking for something for you because the worst thing that could happen for Ten Hag is that all these other jobs fill up. There's nowhere for him to go. He gets sacked without knowing it, either now or mid next season or something like that, which would be even worse. And he has nothing. And so I think that's the consequence of that. And it was interesting, not to agree with this statement, but in that article, it was actually a bit critical of Ten Hag's view that he's safe, or his view that he's going to be in the job next season, which is what kind of leads me to believe it comes more from around his the agent side of things, looking at it and saying, come on, like, every manager, every player, they have a bit of hubris, a bit of ego about them, which is fine. You see that a lot in top professionals, but it's the job of their representatives to kind of get around that and face reality and get them to see things. And so that's what I think is going on there. That his agent is probably looking at it and seeing what we all see, which is no clarification, no contract talks, no statement being made, leads you to one probable outcome from a logical standpoint. Because if Ten Hag is staying next season, why would you not announce it all the way back in March when you still had a chance at Champions League, when you still had these games? Because everybody's got to perform up to a standard for sure. And it's not that no pressure is good, but desperation is not. It's different. There's a difference between wanting to win and having high standards and being on trial. None of the City players, Pep Guardiola, when you talk about mentality, they're not on trial. They have a high mentality does not come from being on trial. It doesn't come from being scared you're going to lose your job. It's not really the way that you generate that type of motivation. So I don't think that's the reason for it, is the point I'm making. So from the outside, I think, anybody around Ten Hag is going to be looking at that and saying, I don't see, we need to start thinking about the future here and looking at other opportunities, talking to other clubs. And I think most other clubs would be looking at it too, and saying from the outside, we think he's probably going to be available. And that's what I make of it. It's not the first time he said that. It's not the first time that Mullica said, Ten Hag himself could walk at the end of the season if there's not certain guarantees and assurances and things like that. And I think there's potential to a lot of sides of that story.
Yeah, and if you're down to the last year, I know you need to have a +1 option of extending it, but that's still not a vote of confidence just by extending it.
No.
I just wonder if you look at Ineos, with all these cost-cutting moves, if they're hoping that someone like Bayern comes in for him, that we don't have to pay him off to let him go. Maybe they're trying to send him. I mean, I'm guessing you're sending messages to Keith Foss that he should be out trying to get alternatives for his for his client. And if Bayern were to ask him, do you want to leave and go to Bayern? That take care of any contractual commitment payment. I don't know,
Right.
but nonetheless, it's, to me, that type of strategy is not how you run a football club. There needs to be some certainty about the direction they're heading in, and this is what I mean by this is where Ineos start to get evaluated. These are the big decisions, and United should know who their manager is going to be next season. Exactly the same way how they recruit, because recruitment's going to be interesting, James. Because when you finish 8th, it's the worst Premier League season in history. I would probably argue, in with some context, that this is probably the worst condition United have been in since the start of the Premier League. There's been transition between a sale and it was woeful underinvestment in relation to their competitors inside the league in key areas. But nonetheless, still a dreadful season. That is unacceptable. But going forward, I think Ineos need to address this issue, and they should have addressed it already. This is where United should know going into a cup final who their manager is going to be next season. Recruitment. How do you get back into the top 4 when you finish 8th? You're going to have to bring in young players because you're not getting top level players. They're not coming to Man United. They have too many other options. And this is where it starts to get difficult, because when you're finishing in 8th, you can't bring the players in that's going to keep you at the top. So now you got to get players that aren't quite at the top, that are willing to come to United, that will develop.
Yeah.
and some experienced players. It's very difficult to get back up there.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's very dangerous to do something like Chelsea did. You can see how long it took. They had a couple rough years, and they've kind of finally clawed up this season. Because a lot of times people look at it and say, well, let's sell everybody, all our experienced players. Let's sell Maguire, let's sell Bruno, let's sell Rashford, let's sell anybody. Varane's leaving, Martial's leaving, and when you really look at it, Eriksen was likely to go. When you look at it, there's not that many senior players, and when you look at the type of people with the right attitude, the right mindset, there's even fewer. You lose Bruno Fernandes and Harry Maguire, who I think are probably two of the best in terms of mentality, in terms of headspace that will be left at United this year and experience. And you do that and you start buying just young players. It can work, but you lack that leadership on the pitch. It gets really, really hard. And in the training ground and everywhere, it gets really hard. And you saw it with Chelsea because they dumped all of their old guard, all the players that had won titles with Chelsea, that had won even the Champions League with Chelsea when they lost Conte and they lost Azpilicueta, and all of these players left. That team is aimless. I mean, even this season, it's been a struggle fighting over penalties, things like that. You can see the problems that show up and why they finished so poorly in prior years. You can see exactly why that happened, and so I think that that's the you need to. That's why you'll probably see United keep some people. Where I wouldn't be surprised to see him keep Scott McTominay this year, who's been at the club a long time as an experienced player, Harry Maguire potentially, and Bruno, of course, and because you just can't give up everybody. You can't give up those players just to raise funds and say we're just going to buy a bunch of young players and lose that kind of direction. You need the right blend, and that's going to be kind of the only way out of this, is to have still a blend. And since you can't recruit top level experienced players, you got to keep some of the decent ones that you have to try to work that in. You don't want to play 11 under 23s. Going into a match, it just doesn't work the way that when you're United, it just doesn't work. It works for young clubs if you're aiming for 9th and 10th and to grow slowly over time, but not for United. So
Yeah,
that is a serious challenge.
there's a difference with young players at clubs that are playing for a move. You can finish
Yes.
the strength because they're playing for themselves. When they come
Yep.
to United, they're playing for trophies, and you get
Yep.
evaluated completely different. The appraisal of you is completely different because you're judged differently. You can have 20 good games and 18 bad games, and you can be judged positively at a club you're playing for a move. But at United, that's not going to happen. So it's very, very difficult to do. Like Arteta could not have signed Declan Rice 2 seasons ago. He could only sign him last season when he finished second, got Arsenal in a position. Then you strengthen. This is one of the reasons why you always strengthen when you're in this position, because trying to do it from here is really hard. Then you're faced with the dilemma that United have been faced before when they finished outside the top four as well, attracting with money,
Yeah.
because the sporting challenges and that always turns out bad because there's no emotional attachment investment to the club, and they're coming to it for all the wrong reasons. So this is going to be a really, really difficult transitional period, and I just think it may not go well in the beginning. It may take a while before
Yeah.
we actually see this bear fruit. And we have to see a different summer than any summer we've seen
Yeah.
on the pages. There has to be no protracted sagas. That has to be very precise. There has to be targets that they go for. They have to be quick in wrapping up deals. Don't have to be perfect, but these are the things that Ineos have promised that will end. So
Yeah, we have
I
to be
think
settled by preseason, and we have a little extra time because of
we're
the
talking
Euros,
six
but they've
weeks
got
away,
to be
teams.
settled.
We're
Yeah,
talking
I know.
preseason. July is 6 weeks away.
Yeah,
So I would like to believe that by the start of preseason, start of July, that we're not sitting in the same situation we're sitting in right now. I think a lot will happen over those next 6 weeks, but with the manager situation should be settled. What's your mood going into this cup final?
I'm not optimistic for quite obvious reasons. I mean, you watch City on Sunday. And like you said, the mentality, you never really got for a moment that they wouldn't win. From before, from during, it's just how they are. And I think that last year we got a little bit of maybe fortune to even be in it slightly because they had the Champions League final to think about. And this year they don't. And they're going to want that trophy pretty bad. So I'm not super optimistic about it. I do think that we have when you have players like Rashford and Højlund to play against the City, you can sometimes exploit them a little bit because Rashford has a really good goal scoring record against City, and by playing quite direct, we can win. And obviously, I think we've performed better when we've played pragmatic football. And if there's ever a game where you can 100% play as pragmatic as possible, it's a cup final like this, right? There's you get no points for style, you get no points for anything, and I think United can defend deeper, competently, with players returning, and hit on the break. And I think with the players that we have, there's always a chance in that. I'm not optimistic, but I think you always have a chance if we're going to go that way to play into the strengths of the team. So I don't feel great, but
Yeah,
but there's a
so
chance.
last season when United played City in the FA Cup final, City still had the Champions League to
Yes.
play shortly after that. And I felt like City took their foot off the pedal a bit. They
Yeah.
don't have that
This is
this
it.
time. Yeah,
Hmm.
so this is their last game. And I have zero hope that United, I mean, obviously, maybe that's not good. Zero expectation.
Yeah,
I always have hope
expectation.
that United will win. I just want to say a couple of things because City fans think this is sour grapes from being a United fan. First of all, as a football fan, when you support a football team, football keeps a couple of promises. One, your football team won't always win.
Yeah.
Two, your rival's success will hurt, as it should hurt. Okay, that's what makes a rivalry. And if you're lucky enough to watch your team win major trophies, you're luckier than most fans. During my lifetime, I've watched United win multiple league titles, multiple European Cups, World Club Cups, FA Cups, League Cups, everything. It's been unbelievable. So there's no part of me that's jealous of City's recent success. But fundamental to the integrity of any competition is the fair application of rules and the following of those rules. Now, I have no doubt that the FFP was put in place as a financial competitive barrier to teams being bought by wealthy benefactors and challenging the status quo. I mean,
Yep.
FFP was never a thought to these people until clubs started getting bought outside of the, traditional elite and being funded, and then they started saying, okay, well, we don't want this, right? Because this is, pushing the price of players up, pushing the price of wages up, and
Yeah.
this is the threat to our hegemony. All right. But that's complaining about the rules is a different issue. They signed up to them. It's embarrassing to the Premier League, um, the integrity of the game, which we always hear about. If I was a broadcaster, I'd be livid. If I was a fan of any of the other 19 teams, you don't know if you're watching fair competition, right? And having a football club faced with this many charges over whether their legacy is legitimate or not, and the fact it hasn't been dealt with is a total disgrace. And when Liverpool were winning trophies, it really bothered me. Right, it was unwatchable. I mean, maybe the Jurgen Klopp farewell bothered me more than City winning the league. I'll be honest, because I can't question the legitimacy of Liverpool's success, even the great
Hmm.
Arsenal teams, all that in the past. But City makes me feel nothing. I mean, it's kind of meh. And it's feels like I'm watching a kid reload a video game until they win. And
Yep.
and when your legacy is being decided in a courtroom and not on a football field, you have a problem. You can't get wins by court order, right?
Yep.
Otherwise, there's no legitimacy in that. So can't get wins by email. No legitimacy that. So for me, this thing needs to get addressed immediately. It should have been addressed already. None of this, even if City didn't exist, United's incompetence would. So I'm not
Yeah.
saying that that United would be amazing if City weren't here. They wouldn't. But when you're punishing Everton, you're punishing Forest. Both of them could have been relegated. There is a really fake feel to this Premier League dominance era. It's kind of like this. What are we watching here? I mean,
Yeah.
this should be a mark of sporting greatness through legitimacy. But instead, we're talking about the best league in the world. Well, we don't know if it's tainted or not.
Yeah, agreed. And like you said, it's not, the matter of the fact is that United has spent as much money and failed, right? Poorly, very, very poorly in comparison. So they've obviously spent well. They've obviously got great players and a great coach and all of that have accomplished it. But this sort of thing hanging over the top, like it's acceptable, it's just one of those things, because if you can just raise the ceiling every time you want financially, right, to do what you need to do, to have more revenue, to do all of that, then it provides you with just a different outlook. If one club has to walk in and say, this is how much money we have to spend this summer period, and that's it, it's going to change the way they operate compared to a club that can say, well, we figured out how to bump up another 15 million that we're going to need to get the deal done that we're going to need to get done, to buy the players we need to do this and that. Because it's like editing the game save. You can just change it a little bit to make the rules fit you, and it's just ridiculous that it gets to hang on that long. And it's kind of the danger here, because you're dealing with when you deal with something like this now, international problems with states and things like that, where you see stories about how the UK government has spoken with Abu Dhabi about these things, and it's like, come on, this is the kind of the problem with the state ownership of clubs, is how does that enter into it? It's easy to go after Everton, it's some guy. It's easy to go after Forest, it's some guy. Easy to go after Leicester, who have a penalty too. It's not easy to deal with this with Manchester City, and that's the issue. I mean, that is a serious problem, because you can't be letting political interrelations factor into how the Premier League adjudicates the fair finances of a football club. It's kind of ridiculous. I have no idea how it's just so problematic that it all gets intertwined like this, and it definitely is a bit of a blemish on the whole thing. As a sport, that makes it feel a bit absurd that it can do that. United can be masters of their own destiny and do better and spend better and all of that, and that's fine. It's just separate to that this kind of thing happens is definitely a mess, and
Well,
it's something that sours a lot of it.
in some sense here, what's interesting, James, is clubs like United. I mean, they wanted FFP. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
The players wanted it, and now those very same rules are a competitive barrier to them catching Manchester City, hoisted by their
Yeah.
own petard. Right. Same with Newcastle. Right. I mean, Newcastle would not be. Newcastle would, in my opinion, been in the top four if FFP didn't exist. You would have had a whole
Yep.
different summer, a whole different January, and Newcastle would be in the top four. But now that's a major impediment to them too. Right? So City are getting derivatives off returns that derivative returns off an investment that quite possibly is fraudulent. Right?
Yeah. I mean, how can they be the highest revenue club in the country? It just
I know.
doesn't make sense.
I know, and so now you've got regulatory capture. You've got you're now inside the tent, and now that regulation's now keeping other people out.
Yeah.
So, like I said, there's no doubt that I doubt the intention behind the laws, but the laws exist, and you can't just ignore them because you don't like them. So, and you're right. It should be a major concern that you have reached the point where you're getting diplomatic pressure being put on a country and threats of removing investment and stuff if they're held accountable. I mean, and the worst thing for City was Everton and Forest getting a punitive punitive measures being taken against them for FFP, because it puts enormous pressure on them now to make sure that City face some level of punishment. I think for the Premier League, if those 115 charges just evaporated, it would be a major blow to their integrity. So this needs to get addressed sooner rather than later. And if I was a City fan, I'd want it addressed, because they lack the respect of the footballing community, because people have let doubt the legitimacy of it. Okay, a prediction for the cup final before we get to some questions.
I don't think we'll win. I think it's going to be something like 3-1, somewhat similar to some of the games where we've had, where it might be a little tight at first, and we might be able to get something, but ultimately, I don't think we have enough to overwhelm them. To not get overwhelmed by them, rather. So yeah, that's what I expect. Phil Foden in particular is a player who's absolutely insane. Not just form, because he's been doing it all year, right? But is just on another planet. And specifically, he was somebody United have had no idea how to deal with. I don't think many clubs do, but that sort of there's just nobody to deal with him. We don't have an Ander Herrera or a Fred that you'll say stick to that guy like glue, like we've done in years past to someone like Eden Hazard and things like that. At one point, one of the wins against City, you've done that. Stuck Fred on Kevin De Bruyne in the Barcelona match. Stuck Fred on Frankie de Jong. We don't have anybody to do that now. Who has the energy levels and the athleticism to keep up with a player like that and kind of eliminate a threat. And I think that's going to be a serious problem, as it was the last time we played him. And so I just don't see how we can match up with them. It's going to take some heroics for sure, but 3-1 is what I would unfortunately say.
Okay, yeah. I think City have too many ways to win, and United will give them a lot of ways that they can lose. And I just never see United being comfortable in that game. They could be 4-0 up in 5 minutes of injury time, and I'm still nervous thinking they'll find a way to concede 5, right?
Yep.
I think it helps that Martinez is back. Obviously, it gets Casemiro out of the back. Maguire might be interested in it, because he won't have had any time on the pitch. So it'd be interesting to see what the back four is. But I just don't think whatever the back four is, it's capable of dealing with all City's threats. United City at the Emirates, or at the Etihad, was Phil Foden really taking Victor Lindelof to the cleaners. So I would love to see United win. I'd be absolutely ecstatic. But this has to be the last time United go into these games without any expectation they'll even be competitive. This is something else we must address. Okay, let's get to some
unless it's on your list of questions. I wanted to ask you one more question. You tell me if it's on the questions that someone's going to ask, so we can discuss it then or not. But I wanted to ask. I wanted to ask your opinion on this point of the manager going into their final season, because I have a really strong opinion on why it doesn't work no matter what, and why it's a really bad idea. Because I've seen a lot of suggestions of giving the manager another year. Just give him a year and see how that goes. And I firmly disagree with that concept. I think that you have two options, which is replace or extend. If you're talking about doing what Ineos are doing, if you're talking about building a foundation, if you're talking about building something for the long term, if you're talking about implementing a game model and the style and all the things that have been talked about in articles and all of that, when you have a manager in their final season, they're coaching for their job. They're always going to have to prioritize short-term results over long-term. The level that they have to reach to be considered successful as a third-year manager going into that final year is much different to what you might have in a first-year coach, somebody new in the job. They're going to be looking at other options all season because they don't have that job security. You're going to have the issues in the dressing room of players not knowing whether the manager is going to be there next season. And I think that in terms of Ineos getting it right, the worst possible outcome is that they have to sack a manager mid-season in their first year. It is the worst possible thing that could occur because of the instability that it would provide. When you sign players and they come in and in their first season you've sacked the manager, it's a disaster. It's a mess. When you're going into something like that, I think it's a really bad thing if that happens, and I think that really can't be under consideration that you might make a change mid-season if you're going into it with a manager. I think it's completely contrary to the idea and what's being preached of a long-term thing and building something stable for the future. I would much rather see Ten Hag given an extra year and say you get a 2+1 or something like that than to see him go into a final season. I 100% would much rather that. I think it's an impossible task for a manager to do that in the current situation that we're in. Once you're already successful and doing well, I think you can have really high standards and replace people often, but I don't think you can in the situation United are in right now. I think it's exactly what Chelsea did. It's where they started just swapping. They sacked Thomas Tuchel 5 games in, had an awful season where they sacked another manager after hiring Graham Potter. It's a disaster. It's just a mess, and I really don't think you can do that.
Would
That's my
agree
view on it.
that United definitely need to make some type of statement on this to provide some stability, some continuity. I would say that if you look at the way Ineos have been building, they've gone from top down because
Yeah.
they want the hires to know who they work for.
Yep.
So I think whoever they try to sign, they're obviously going to want to know that this is their manager, right? So they're going to want to know who they play for. I think what's important is that when Ineos, this team makes signings, that they're not just coming for the manager; they're coming for the club
Yeah.
that they're
Correct.
becoming.
Totally.
This is really important. There's other reasons to want to come to Manchester United other than they just like the guy who's your manager, right?
Yeah.
That probably should be the last reason why
Yeah.
you should go work for somebody because they're the ones that's most likely to change. And this. So if you're just coming for a manager, if he leaves, we sack him. Damn what. So
Mhm.
that is always the flimsiest reason to come
Yes,
to
for
a football
sure.
club. Um, but I think that it absolutely needs to be a statement. They could have made a statement easily. They haven't done. I think that level of uncertainty isn't healthy for anyone. It's very difficult to work towards long-term goals when there's no long-term commitment to the guy trying to implement them.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
Managers can be sacked at any time. That's true. And I think that it would be if I was Ineos, and I wanted to keep Ten Hag, I would give him a new contract that had heavily, it was littered with heavy contingencies. There would be no payoff if you're here, if you're here. And Erik Ten
Yeah,
Hag
I would agree.
should have no problems signing a contract like that because he should be convincing Ineos that will never happen,
Yep.
right? And if it does, then you're entitled to sack me. So the other thing is you can't be overconfident in how well your departments are going to perform out of the gate. You can't be,
Yeah.
these are going to be ready, fit for purpose first day. Everyone sits onto the desk. That's going to take a while before they're functioning at the
Yep.
right level. But I would agree that for long-term investment, for an investment in the future of the football club and stability, that is something that has to get addressed quickly. Um, Beyonce, if you like it, put a ring on it, right? So if you
Pretty
like him,
much.
keep him. If not, go. And
Yeah.
there's no reason why that couldn't be announced. Maybe
Yeah.
there, like I said, there's an agreement between Ten Hag and the club, possibly to say don't say anything till after the cup final.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
And I'm not
doesn't work.
buying no value in the market as a reason you don't replace the manager either.
No,
It's
no,
never been correct and never been the right thing. And that's just a poor relationship if you're
Well, I
doing
mean,
something like that.
certainly Edin Terzic wouldn't have been on everyone's lips, was a top manager and he took Dortmund to a
No,
final.
it's in the
I mean,
final. Yeah.
there's guys out there, if you're supposedly football people and you know this,
Yep.
it's market. So, this is why you're supposed to be night and day above what was here before because you can
Yep.
make smart, nuanced football decisions
Yep.
based on, an expertise that other people
Mhm.
didn't have. So that's your job. That's why you're paid a lot of money. That's why you have all this data analysis to tell us who these people are. Because fans, we're not paid. We don't do this every day.
Yeah,
This is your
not my
job.
job to figure out who it should be as an alternative.
Yeah,
It's not
otherwise,
journalists
yeah,
or anybody's job.
yeah, these are supposed to be people that have, a lot of expertise. That's why they're paid. So, yeah, I agree. There has to be some level of commitment
Commitment.
going into
Yeah,
next season, and that has to be, to me, the first thing that happens after the cup final
100%.
is that has to be clarified going forward.
Yep.
Okay, let's get into a few of the questions. United all the way. I'm not 100% sure what he means by this. What's going on with the women's side?
Yeah, well, and this is an example because I think some people are pretty unhappy with it, of the concern that people will have, because obviously they won a cup final, right? Which is great, first trophy ever and all of that. But there's a lot of concerns over Mark Skinner being unconvinced about the coach and all of that. And he was handed this 1 year thing, right? Where now it's still uncertain. I think that the unfortunate truth about it is just that, Ineos have one person in the building right now. If we think about that from a football standpoint, which is Jason Wilcox, and the women's team is not his forte. They just unfortunately ran up against it and haven't gotten to it, to being able to make a big long-term plan for the women's team. There's a lot up in the air on that, for sure, and it's something that they need to address and ideally do better on, for the future. There's no doubt about it. But I think it's kind of demonstrative of the last point that we spoke about, which is people are pretty unhappy that it's sort of like, Skinner got another year because we don't know what to do, is essentially the view. And that's not an ideal way to operate, moving forward. And so I think the honest truth of it is just that they haven't gotten to it, and they haven't had the time and the resources, or maybe the expertise, because it's not an area they're experts in terms of people appointed to properly address the women's team. And hopefully,
What would be
I
different
think
about the experts in the women's team that would be different for the men's team?
just knowing the names and the people, right? I mean, I don't imagine that most of them ever watch women's football. Quite honestly, I just don't. I don't think Jason Wilcox spends his time watching women's football to analyze it and know who's out there, say, as a potential
Murdo
coach.
was responsible for the women's team and the men's team.
Mhm. Yeah, and he's not there. And Dan Ashworth, I think it would fall under Dan Ashworth's remit for sure, but he's not there.
That's something
And
that has to be addressed.
yeah, yeah, because that is a problem. That is something he would be responsible for as the director of football at United, is setting up the right organization for the women's team. And I think the women's director left as well
When
previously.
is
It
his
had nothing to do with
arbitration?
Ineos.
When
I
is his
don't know.
arbitration?
It was supposed to start this month, from that last report, but we haven't heard anything about it. So maybe, sometimes the threat of arbitration is a bit of a negotiation on its own. So maybe it's reopened some discussions. I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. But we should find out something before the end of the month, because it was supposed to happen
I was
in
going to say
May.
that also has to be the next thing after a cup
Yes.
final. There has to be some. I'm sure Newcastle
Yeah.
want that too.
Yeah.
Okay, John Dean says previous years under the Glazers we would always be maxed out, 4 signing window and almost no exits. Under Ineos, do you foresee know that we will be able to bring in 5, 6, 7 new signings in one window, or will we still be shot like before? Obviously, Ineos are going to have different red lines, different,
Mm.
a lot more flexibility. It all depends on who you speak to. Depends on we'll set your expectation on what to expect this summer. But one thing is, United have to replace the players that leave. The squad's
Yeah.
too small. So if they've let the likes of Varane go, Martial go, they can only do that on the pretense that they already know who they're going to replace him with. I think one of the things that when you look at Ineos that they're looking to cut back on, and I don't disagree with this, is why are we having fourth and fifth choice centre backs on 250 grand a week? That have no resale value, that are 29, 30. That those positions should be taken up with younger players that are on a lot less money, and that have a whole different value, to the business as well. But obviously, they have to be of a requisite level. I think what we'll see is, the first team will still have really strong, players, but I think what we're going to see on the bench, second choice players will be a lot younger players on
Yeah.
less. to get that balance right. Because ultimately, United's wage bill's really it's inflated by a lot of the squad players on massive amounts of money.
Yeah, that don't even play much. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so like as we said, David Sancho, all that, Martial, all that. I think this is another reason why they'll let Eriksen go,
Yep.
because that position and how much he's played and how much he's contributed could be easily filled by a younger player on a fraction of the cost. I think you'll see a lot of players leave, obviously, because that's very important to PSR. So I expect, as we were saying earlier in the podcast, needed to move with a lot more expediency and a lot more efficiency, be a lot more decisive on the targets. And I don't think we'll be limited to those 3-4 signings. And I
Yeah.
would expect to bring more than that in this summer. Andrew Logue asks us, do you think keeping Ten Hag without backing him with a contract extension makes him a lame duck manager, and how will impact the dressing room? Yeah, we've just covered that.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Absolutely.
reading these lives. Reading these lives. Okay. Same question. Has he gone yet? Pretty much. Prospective signings from Ben Allen. Want to know who's managing next season. We covered that. So let me see. Who would you prefer? It's all Ten Hag stuff.
That's kind of why I wanted to cover it. I had a feeling there'd
Yeah.
be a lot of questions about that.
Yeah, let me see if there's any different ones. Yeah, we just covered the women's stuff. Let me see. I have a couple of questions here from Meg. We'll let this be the last one. Have Ineos United hierarchy decided on a game model moving forward yet, or is that still being decided?
I'm sure they have. I'm sure that they have. I'm sure that it was one of the first things that came up with Omar Barada. I'm sure it's one of the main reasons why they hired Jason Wilcox. Jason Wilcox is, when you talk about a game model and properly implementing it, if you look at the clubs who have, it starts at the youth level. Ajax, Barcelona, Madrid, everywhere. It starts at the youth level because that's how you get a game model where you have consistency, where you can promote players, where you play from top to bottom the same thing. And I think that was one of the biggest driving influences of bringing someone like Jason Wilcox in, is that's an area where he's very good, is understanding how to do that and what it'll take. And I think Jim Ratcliffe commented on it in that interview you discussed earlier, way back when. So it's obviously something on the forefront of their mind, and I'm quite sure that at the executive level, it's decided this is the way we want to play. This is the way we want to move forward. And that's going to be the guiding influence on probably, on recruit, because you have to decide that to recruit. So of course, if they're contacting players, if they're lining things up, which they are, they must have decided on the game model aspect of it. They're not going to go at it randomly like we've been for years, or I'd be quite surprised.
Okay, let me add just one more. We have a question here from the Money coach, Ibrahimovic. This guy's Joe Nolan used to play with him as a kid, football back Belfast. What a player he was! Oh my God. Hoyland over or under 25 goals all competitions next season?
I would say over. I think he can do even better. I think 15. How many get 15 or 16 total this season? And we still have a cup, so maybe he could get 16, 17.
25 next season? You think so?
I think he could do it. Yeah.
Maybe even with another striker where
Yeah, because we'll get Elise in there to create for him.
This is where we have to go. This is where we should leave it. Get the
Yep.
editors on that came here. Get that edited out. We'll have this is a children's show. We'll have none of that filth on here. See. So next time we record, we will know the result.
Might know a lot of things by next time we
So
record.
next Monday's show should be interesting. Thanks to all of you for downloading the podcast with Martin earlier in the week. Hopefully we make that a regular thing. It's great to have Martin back. James and I'll be back next week. Take it easy, mate.
Yeah. See you later.
Cheers. Bye, folks.